And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We've been talking this morning about the explosive verdict yesterday in the Harvey Weinstein sex crimes trial. Mr. Weinstein was found guilty of 2 of the 5 charges that he was facing: first-degree criminal sex act and third-degree rape of Jessica Mann. A lot to break down in light of the fact that he will be sentenced on March 11th, and we have the privilege right now of having one of Mr. Weinstein's lead defense attorneys, Donna Rotunno, with us right now. Ms. Rotunno, great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's amazing to see you here because I've been in court for like 2 months watching and I haven't had a chance to meet you, so this is great.
Happy to be here.
I'm going to start with the million-dollar question.
Sure.
How is he doing right now? Where is he?
Well, as of this morning, he was in Bellevue. Now as I was walking in, I was getting a couple of questions to see if he's been moved. We have not heard any of that confirmation yet, but if he's doing better physically, I'm sure at some point he will be moved. But as of this morning, he was still at Bellevue.
Is this in relation to the verdict, do you think?
I'm sure part of it is. I mean, obviously, Harvey has had health issues leading up to this, so I think it could probably be a culmination of both health issues that he was already experiencing and, of course, the shock of yesterday.
And it was a shock because there was a conversation, well, after what the jury came back with on Friday, did it kind of give you a glimpse that they might have convicted him, and that's where they were going?
Sure. We of course have known that this could have been a possibility since the day we took this case, so it wasn't as if he wasn't prepared for this possibility. I mean, the minute he was charged with the crime where he was facing life in prison, this was something that he was aware of. But in terms of the shock factor, I think just, when you live in this world of unknowns up until that point, and then when you actually hear those words, it just becomes more real.
But did he plan this last weekend saying this might be the last weekend I'm free?
He did.
Yeah.
He did. He was aware of that.
Yeah, and I want to go to the jury verdict.
Sure.
How do you think they came to the decision, and specifically Jessica Mann, which everybody who looked at the trial felt that was the tougher case for the prosecution than it was for Miriam Haley?
Sure. That's the part of it that probably surprises me the most, and I think what that tells me is it doesn't matter what 12 people and what time, at what point we're sitting there. I think that the pressure of this case, I don't know if we could have ever found 12 people who could say, I felt comfortable walking out and saying not guilty to everything, just given the public pressure that this case has brought on.
In other words, even if it was at the beginning or during the course of the trial, you felt that not all the jurors were impartial?
Correct. And
even the ones that you selected? Sure,
because at some point you're stuck, right? You only have so many challenges. You're in a position where you have to select certain people at certain points, and it really, as the trial went on, and without the jury being sequestered, and it really dawned on me the weekend in between the note coming out on Friday, just this past weekend, and yesterday. I'm watching the coverage myself and thinking, even if they're trying not to watch TV, even if you turn it on or you pull up something on your computer, it says, jury deadlocked on most serious charges. It's like, that's not something they're supposed to know.
Right.
So it's like, how do you stay away from all of that, right? So if it was a circumstance where the jury thought, well, we have to give him something, maybe that's what was going through their minds. We'll never know the answer to that, but I think in the end, thinking that we were going to get 12 people who could say we were going to let him completely walk out without any guilty verdicts, I think was probably not going to happen.
This is kind of bleeding into the issue of an appeal, but do you think that there was a big mistake made by the court to not have this case in upstate New York, to not have a different jury, to not have them sequestered? I imagine these are all issues that would come up in an appeal.
Sure, I definitely think sequestering is one of the biggest issues. I know in terms of moving the case to another jurisdiction, of course, I think that would have been helpful, but again, are you still going to find 12 people who don't know about Harvey Weinstein? It would be difficult, I think, anywhere, especially in the state of New York. So I don't know if that plays as much of a role, but I definitely think sequestration of jurors. I think even a bigger issue was in the questioning of jurors. I think the questioning should have been done individually.
Yeah, I'm hearing flavors of appeal language right now.
Sure.
The general relationship between the court, the judge, and the defense was interesting to see. I was there for Windowgate. Yes. I was there when you asked the judge to close the window and he just said no. Yeah. What's the dynamic there? What am I not seeing?
I think that these are comments that I'd be more than happy to come on and talk about after Mr. Weinstein is sentenced. I'm not going to get into all that now, but yeah, there definitely was a little bit of push and pull. No question. In the end, I think he was okay to Damon and I, but we'll talk about it more after.
Don't worry, I'll never forget. There's not one thing you can't do for us. You could do for us. I was there for that.
Well, that was me.
That was you. So my question to you is, when you look at this case and you say, maybe I made a mistake in the cross-examination. Maybe I made a mistake in a closing argument. Is that a conversation that you had yesterday? Is that a conversation you had with Mr. Weinstein where you said, I wish you would have done that? Or there was a mistake? Or this is just the facts that were given? We did the best we could.
I definitely feel like we did the best we could. I definitely feel like we, left it all on the table. I mean, in looking back, and of course every night I would go back and look at the cross-examinations, and there's always when you say, oh, should I have asked a question, or should I have, made something more clear, or let it stand out more. But in the end, I think there was nothing that we did not ask that we should have asked. Maybe we thought, oh, highlight this differently or handle it differently. I'm proud of the work that we did. It was painstaking, detail-oriented work every day. This was not a fly-by-night representation. This was hours upon days upon weeks upon months. I mean, this is all we did. This is all we did.
And look, your client was convicted.
Yes.
There's no doubt about that. And the thing, though, is the jury did not convict on the highest charges, and they also didn't convict on rape 1, which is more significant, higher prison term than rape 3. What do you think it was about Annabella Shore's testimony that they maybe didn't believe, and why not rape 1?
Well, the Mimi count, I think it's a B felony, so I think that falls in that category. But in terms of Annabella, I think the length of time, I do think that we made a compelling argument about the fairness aspect of that. I mean, how do you defend something from 27 years ago, or how do you disprove a negative? I think that those are two difficult things to do. And how do you do that if you don't have access to potential evidence that could disprove that? And so I think that probably played a role. I think the whole notion of how he got up to that apartment was problematic, especially for New Yorkers or someone like me who lives in Chicago in a city in a secure building. And it just doesn't happen where people show up at your door. And if you hear a knock at your door, it's much more jarring than, just, oh, I was checking to see if it was the neighbors. I mean, I've lived in my building for, 8 years, and I don't know if a neighbor's ever really knocked on the door.
Right.
And I'm friendly with them. So I think that probably, played a little bit of a role. I think, I don't think that the Rosie Perez testimony ended up being helpful to the government. I think it looked like overkill, and especially when I asked her on cross-examination who her friends were at the time, and she didn't mention Rosie, I think that probably raised a red flag. Based on the questions that the jurors asked in the testimony they wanted read back. That's the way I viewed that.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, I was there for Paul Felcher's testimony. Did that go exactly the way that you anticipated it to go? Because there's been criticism about him taking the stand.
Sure, and I will say that there was a question about whether or not we were going to put him on, and there were some things that Mr. Weinstein wanted us to do that we felt was not worth the risk of not doing it if it was something that he really wanted. I think the one thing we can say about Paul, though, is Paul was honest. Paul was not someone who got up there and, gave these cookie cutter answers like every single one of the state's witnesses did. Paul said, look, those are things I said when I wasn't under oath, and now that I'm taking an oath, I have to be really truthful, and this is what I remember. And so in some ways, I think some people thought that was unbelievably credible because he just said, look, this is what I can do. I'll say this about Paul Felcher. He's an honorable guy. I've gotten to know him during this process. Putting himself in a position, I knew what position I was putting myself in when I took this case, but for witnesses, it was tough. And to ask people to come in and, take that scrutiny and walk past the cameras and anybody that we put on the witness stand, it was a difficult thing for them.
Let me jump on that. What has this been like for you? Because obviously your client gets criticized constantly. Yes. You yourself have been criticized numerous times.
Do you like to see my Twitter?
Yeah, I know. I see it. And a question, of course, is what has it been like for you to be the subject of that? What has it been like to be the subject of it constant times in press conferences outside the court? You haven't had an opportunity to respond a lot of times. How have you been dealing with that?
Well, I feel like I don't need to respond. I feel like I always say I think that those things say more about them than it does about me. I know who I am. I know what my beliefs are. And if this process and taking this case has taught me one thing, it's taught me that I'm more steadfast today than I was when I first took it. So in many ways, I think it's a blessing. I look at the criticism as, where we are in this country and how if we have different views from someone else, how we just dig ourselves in. And it's like, I want to be able to have the conversation. I want to be able to talk about our differences. I think it helps us move forward. And, in taking the criticism that I take, I will never call myself a victim. The criticism I take. I chose to take this case. I knew, I talk about choice all the time. I knew that when I took this case, this was going to happen to me. I have embraced it, and I've said, look, this is your view. You have a right. We live in this great country. You have a right to your view, and I have a right to mine. And that's the part that everybody seems to miss. It's like everybody else has a right to their opinion, but if I give mine, then we're in a different conversation. So, it's been interesting, and I think when this is over with, maybe I can be a different voice on this, and I would embrace too.
Well, when this is all done, there's a lot of questions that I would like to ask. But the thing is it taking controversial views,
Yes.
we obviously know that you get subject to criticism.
Yes.
And there was an interesting part where you had mentioned that, and I'm curious, after this verdict, do you feel there's a danger of a chilling of relationships between men and women moving forward? Is there a danger in your eyes after this verdict that if you just believe one person, and then as you said in your closing, there's no police, there's no DNA,
Right.
that's a new way of looking at the law? And I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's frightening. It's frightening for anybody who's charged with a crime of any type, because if it starts in sex crimes, does then it sort of go down and bleed into other types of cases? We have a system of justice in this country that works. We have to allow it to work, and if we start blurring the lines of what's really a presumption of innocence and what's really due process and what's really, I think it's scary. It's funny. There was and there's been so much press on this, obviously, but one of my favorite articles was an article from a hometown newspaper in the suburbs of Chicago, western suburbs. It's the Daily Herald, and the headline was a picture of us on the front, and the headline said, "Due process first." And I thought, oh, if that's what can come out of this, that's such a win for the system. It's a win for all of us.
But the fact that the jury deliberated for almost a week, you feel good about that? Because
Well,
they didn't
sure.
come back in 2 hours and convict him.
No, sure. I think that what that shows us is there was obviously reasonable doubt, and I'm just curious, and maybe someday we'll know if jurors speak to the press. I'm curious, kind of what went on back there. Was there some horse trading? Was there a circumstance where some said, "Well, I believe Annabella," and some said, "No, and I don't believe Jessica, but I'll give you Jessica if you give us Annabella." Who knows? Who knows what that conversation?
Well, I think
was
you're
like.
also speaking about the verdict sheet. And
Yes.
what is your views on that verdict sheet? We've shown it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
It felt like an LSAT exam,
Yeah, it's very confusing. We made, I think, 5 different applications to the court, and I'm sure all of that will be public at some point for everyone to see, but we made at least 5 applications to the court about what we thought it should look like. In the end, we continued to plead with the judge about it to the point where he, at the bench threatened to maybe throw us out if we continued to talk about it. But we foresaw that this was going to be an issue.
And you had mentioned also representing Harvey Weinstein, kind of your experience. What was it like representing him? Because you were the third defense team. Were you nervous taking this? What was your interaction with him on the day-to-day? I mean, I saw it from my perspective, and I don't know what I saw. I just saw a friendly interaction. But what was it like?
It was actually always friendly. I met with Harvey when he first called me. I came to New York at the end of May to meet with him. And I knew, obviously, that he had 2 former attorneys, and I have nothing negative to say about them. I think they, just for whatever reason, didn't fit into whatever vision Harvey had. It had nothing to do with who they were as lawyers or nothing. It was more just about what he was looking for. And I met with him, and I walked out of that initial meeting, and the first thing I said to myself was he didn't force anybody to do anything. That was just my own view and vibe and feeling that I got from him. He has been nothing but respectful to me in every way. He was very much a part of the defense team. I'm sad about the fact that he's not home with his family. It's not what I wanted for him, and it's, you put your all into something and you want a different result, and it's not easy.
So there's one thing to say, we cover cases all the time about reasonable doubt. You don't have to put on another suspect. You don't have to give an alternative theory. Just hit the state's case. I want to make sure I understood this, though. Do you believe that the 6 women who testified, and they testified for different reasons, some were supporting witnesses, some were the main complaining witnesses, do you believe that they all either lied or they're all mistaken about what they remember? How should we be thinking about the defense here?
Sure. I think in many ways there was a reframing of facts. I think that there was some regret for actions. I think that the motive to be involved with Harvey in any way, whether it was one time or multiple times or for years, I think was because they wanted something from Harvey. And the government painted Harvey as this monster who took and tricked and was this villain. And I mean, I look at it from another side, and it's like, who's to say that only men can be the manipulators? I mean, you heard the testimony. You saw the back and forth for 3 days between Jessica Mann and I. You saw the conversations with Miriam Halehi about, you say he raped you and then you accept plane tickets and you get in cars and so I just have a hard time reconciling that. And I think that my fear is that this whole new maybe potential wave that we're talking about is going to remove fact and logic, and we're going to be deciding criminal cases on emotion. And again, that should scare all of us, because an unjust system for Harvey Weinstein is an unjust system for you, me, and everybody else we care about.
Well, I'm curious to see the precedent this case sets.
Yes.
We only have 30 seconds. Got to ask you real quick.
Sure.
What's going on with Gloria Allred? You're back and forth with her. Yesterday, the press conference.
I don't have any comment. Gloria has a right to do what she does, and I have a right to do what I do, and, we just disagree.
That's it?
That's it.
All right. Well, I did walk in the other day when there was that dispute. I was two feet away from the press conference yesterday. Tell you what, maybe when you have an opportunity and this all finishes up, we can all talk about what's going on.
Sure.
Mr. Rotunno, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
It was a privilege to watch you, your team, the prosecution as well, just from a legal point of view, watching arguments all around, very, very impactful and impressive. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, let's take a break. When we come back, a lot more.